Over the weekend, Bolivian President Evo Morales, Bolivia's first elected indigenous leader and a leftist, was ousted by his own military because of claims that his election that occurred 3 weeks ago was illegitimate, provided without evidence. So that's otherwise known as a military coup. So Morales, he wasn't killed on the spot, but it's still a coup, despite what the mainstream media would have you think.
Bolivian President Evo Morales has resigned. Morales announced he was stepping down Sunday afternoon after the military asked him to leave office.
This as protesters and the Bolivian military have been holding protests today demanding he step down. Morales' allies resigned amid a fierce backlash to a disputed election last month.
But it wasn't a resignation, it was a coup. And when we're talking about a disputed election, where is that coming from? Who is pushing that talking point? Because once again, there is no evidence that has been provided of any fraud. It's just being said, and the lazy or purposely disingenuous media is regurgitating it. Morales' main opponent, former President Carlos Mesa, is vastly preferred by the Trump administration. Since Morales was elected in 2005, the US government has been hostile, and Bolivia has not had ambassadorial relations with the United States since 2009. Morales is one of the last remaining members of a cohort of independent left presidents who have been opposed and in some cases removed with the help of the United States. Yeah, America has a pretty terrible record when it comes to removing leftist leaders and installing right-wing ones, specifically in South America and specifically during the Cold War. And unshockingly, there are rumblings that the Trump administration and or the CIA could have been behind this, because that's not just conjecture, there's historical precedent for it. And from the outside looking in, it seems like there was a coordinated effort with the US and the Organization of American States, known as the OAS, which in the past has helped the US remove or has advocated for removing the leftist leaders during the Cold War to delegitimize the election before there was any evidence. When the official tally was done, Morales had 47.1% of the vote, with 36.5% for Mesa in second place. The opposition cried foul. Long before the votes were counted, Mesa had already indicated he would not accept the decision of the electoral authorities if Morales were to win. What is more surprising and disturbing was the press statement from the OAS the day after the election. It expressed deep concern and surprise at the drastic and hard-to-explain change in the trend of the preliminary results after the closing of the polls, but it did not present any evidence for its questioning of the election results. Hours before the OAS press statement and even longer before the votes were counted, Senator Marco Rubio stated falsely, "In Bolivia, all credible indications are Evo Morales failed to secure necessary margin to avoid second round in presidential election." He also alleged without evidence that there was some concern he will tamper with the results or process to avoid this. Trump administration officials followed with similar statements. And it's so weird that all of this ramped up after Morales had been nixing natural gas mining throughout his country. It's like a very specific coincidence. Never mind that he lifted millions out of poverty. He nationalized a lot of the industry there. He used socialist programs, and he did work with the courts to extend his term limit so he could stay in power, and that's not something I approve of. I mean, FDR did it. I don't really like that either. If we're looking historically, Mike Bloomberg did it in New York, someone who's been in the news recently, and I don't like it, but it doesn't mean that the subsequent elections in which they were re-elected were illegitimate. I mean, Angela Merkel is still in power in Germany, and I don't really hear from these neoliberals about her. And then the critics will say that they stopped the votes from counting. Yes, in indigenous areas where he would have won, which is a practice that America does. It's called a quick count, where they make those estimations. So, but even so, again, putting that all aside, Morales agreed to another election. But then the military came in and kicked him out in a coup. And lastly, you see police celebrating and cutting off the indigenous flag on their uniform. This is really transparent, and it's racism, and it's rooted in racism for indigenous people in Bolivia. And it's the natural progression when we're looking at Bolivia's colonial history. So when we're talking about this story specifically, to not look at the colonial relationship in Bolivia and that history in South America, it would be doing a disservice when we're talking about, I'll say it again, this coup.